Hello, we are going to be covering Chapter 14, Early Adulthood, which covers ages approximately 19 to 35 in this video lecture. So, the issues that we look at in early adulthood that are most important in terms of our development include marriage, starting a family, work life, leisure life, and something that we call personal development. In a sense, that's how we try to improve ourselves. So, one of the main challenges of early adulthood is that young adults want the emotional rewards of the sense of connecting with family, but they are also wanting to distance themselves from the painful memories and difficult relationships of their parents. Essentially, no matter how old we get, our parents are still going to judge us and not hold back. They gave life to us, and boy, they are going to judge us till the day we die. So consequently, young adults often create families with their closest friends. And as I mentioned in class, we can see this example multiple times in various television shows, including the show Friends, where the peers that you spend your time with become an ad hoc family. Studies have shown that a strong friend support system can have some very positive effects. First, it creates a greater contribution than a family support system to the emotional well-being of a young adult. In other words, you feel better when you're with your friends. Secondly, children of young adults who are part of an extended social network are more likely to perform better in school, be more socially competent, and happier. Essentially, what's happening is that the friends you make become, in a sense, your family. And as a consequence, even your own children benefit from this family you've created. Approximately 95% of Americans get married at some point in their lives. About 54% of those American adults are currently married and living with their spouses. So yes, a fair number of us will eventually end up getting divorced. In 1970, the average U.S. family size was 3.58, or if we want to round up, close to 4. Since then, family size has begun to shrink. It's now, as of 2005, 3.18 people. And part of that is that we are having fewer children. And also with the prevalence of divorce, you see a lot of households where there's only one parent instead of two parents. And as a consequence, instead of having two parents and a child, you're now looking at two parents minus one parent plus two child. So you are losing one of the parents from the household because of divorce. Latino families tend to have the highest number of members of family, up almost 4, and a lot of that is because the vast majority of Latin families are Roman Catholic and they do not believe in divorce. Americans families that are African American, 3.4, and then white U.S. families right at that 3 level. Average age of first marriage in the 1950s, men were about 22, women were about 20, so very young getting married in those days. The average age of the first marriage started to increase starting around 1970, which happened to coincide with the beginning of the women's movement and the advent of birth control being available for women. And as a consequence to that, people started to delay when they got married. By 2010, the average age of the first marriage for men is 28 and for women is 26. While we talk about marriage and love, we also have to identify what is love. What is a romantic, passionate love relationship? And Sternberg developed the concept of 3 elements that go into a romantic relationship. The first one is passion, which is a strong desire for another person. Intimacy, which is the ability to share one's deepest and most secrets feeling with each other. And Last, commitment, conviction that one will stay with another regardless of the sacrifices involved. You commit to be with one another no matter what. Now, of course, there's always going to be scenarios where people's commitment will ease off. So, for example, your husband starts beating you or your wife becomes an alcoholic. Those are the kinds of things that will oftentimes inhibit a long-term relationship. This chart, I need you guys to know very well. It's going to be all over the quiz, so I highly recommend knowing it inside and out. Here are Sternberg's 7 forms of love using his 3 ingredients. We have a liking, I like you. Intimacy, meaning you go on dates, you're sharing stories about one another, you're revealing things, but there's no passion and there's no commitment yet. You haven't started a sexual relationship, and you haven't said to yourself, boy, I want to be with this person forever. Then there's infatuation, which is passion, but no intimacy or commitment. And a lot of times, we meet somebody, we hook up with them, we haven't really shared much about ourselves, and we're totally not committed to them. But we think about them all the time because the physical side of the relationship is extremely entertaining and stays in one's mind. Then we have what's called empty love, and this is where you're committed, but there's no passion or intimacy. And again, a commitment is if you and your partner decide you're going to stay together for the children, but you're not going to interact at all, and you're certainly not going to be having sex. That's what we call an empty love. Then there's romantic love, and this is when you're beginning to seriously date one another. You're intimate, you're sharing your hopes, dreams, and aspirations. You're sexual, so you're also sharing bodily fluids, but you're not quite at that commitment level where you're going to put a ring on it. So this is the step right before somebody gets down on their knee and asks for your hand in marriage, or you ask for their hand in marriage. Then there's something called fatuous love, and that's where commitment and passion are important, but you're not intimate emotionally with each other. Today, there's a lot of young adults who engage in what we call friends with benefits. They are somebody you can call and say, yo, I want to have sex. They come over, you're committed, you make sure you get tested for STDs on a regular basis. You're not dating in the sense that you're sharing your hopes, dreams, and aspirations, but you spend a lot of quality time together having a physical relationship that you're committed to, but you're not looking to eventually get married or anything, despite what all the romantic comedies try and show you. Then there's companionate love, and this is when you are committed and you're intimate, but there's no passion. And this happens in marriages that are very long-term. It's you love each other, you want to spend the rest of your lives together, you share everything, but the sexual side of the relationship has waned. It's the idea that you've eaten a peanut butter and jelly sandwich every day for your whole life, and at some point you just say, you know what, I don't even want a sandwich. I'm going to just take care of eating my peanut butter on a spoon. So, companionate love is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's usually seen in marriages that have gone on for a very long time. The ideal, the Disney princess storyline, is the consummate love. There's commitment, there's intimacy, and there's passion. So when a person gets married, this is usually what they're feeling. They're committed, they love the person, they love their idiosyncrasies, they love their wackiness, and they're also having a very good sexual relationship. So all 3 of these things kind of bring that consummation together. Now, over the course of a marriage or relationship, the importance of each of the components change. So in the beginning, passion is very important. It brings the couple sometimes together to become more emotionally intimate or become more committed. But as the relationship changes, and especially as you have children, that will also change. So what does each gender want in a marriage partner? First, We're going to look at what both men and women want. They want someone of similar age. Yes, there are people who will marry somebody who is much older than them or much younger than them, but that falls outside the line of the average. Most people are within 7 years of each other in terms of age. So if you think about your relationships, and again, if you're dating someone who's 15, 20 years older than you, it's not that unusual, it's just not part of the norm. The vast majority of us end up marrying or dating someone who is within 7 or 8 years of our age. Also our values, and this is very, very important. What holds important to you? Are you somebody who is very devoutly religious? Are you someone who believes that the Republican Party is the best party in the government? Are you someone who believes that you should blow up all political parties and start a new government? Are you somebody who believes that a family should have dinner every night at 6 o'clock together? Whatever your value system is, and it's all over the map, it's usually have to be pretty consistent with your partner. If your partner is a raving Tea Party and you're a raving liberal Democrat, you're probably not going to enjoy life together. You're going to spend most of your time fighting about fundamental things. Also, in terms of values, are you somebody who wants to have 3 kids and your partner wants to have none? That can also become a big issue. And then finally, education. And part of this is because of who we hang out with. When you go to college, you tend to hang out with people who are also in college. And as such, your romantic partners become somebody that is at the equal education as you are. Same thing with your job. Sometimes you'll meet your future love muffin on the job, and either as a client or as a coworker. And again, that idea that they have a similar education is going to be very consistent. Now, men are specifically looking for physical attractiveness in a partner. Men are very visual. They've been visual since the Cro-Magnon days. And as a consequence, they see something that is appealing to them and they're going to go out and try and get it. And it's the same reason why Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue and, the Cro-Magnons were out trying to take down the woolly mammoth, because those visual things stimulated their brains. Women, on the other hand, specifically look for 2 things. One is religion, and a huge part of that is because the woman is responsible for giving birth. If a woman is Catholic and her husband is Jewish, there is going to be a fundamental disagreement about how that child is raised. Now, if the father says, I don't care what you raise the child, then that's fine. But if the father says, I want my son raised as in Judaism, and the mother says, I want my son raised in Catholicism, that's going to be a big problem. The other issue is the occupation of the partner. You want a husband who is able to support you, especially when the children are little. Up until the last 50 years, really, or even 40 years, women stayed home and raised the children. Now, with our economic situation the way it is, you really do need both parents working in many situations. And in many situations, women are now earning more money than the man. The problem comes down to, of course, is the fact that in many states, women are not compensated while they're out having a baby. So they have to support themselves, and oftentimes having a husband who has means, meaning money, will make it easier. The biggest risk to having to a marriage is having a baby. The transitionhood to parenthood is a traumatic factor within a relationship. You go from just looking out for the both of you, the 2 of you, husband and wife, and then all of a sudden there's this third person in the relationship. The husband often finds that he is relegated to position number 3 in the household because mom is focused on baby. Oftentimes, that idea of spending quality time with your partner, watching TV, or just snuggling on the couch is no longer feasible because there's a crying, whining baby there the whole time. So things can get pretty disruptive when the child shows up. The success or failure of a long-term romantic relationship can be assessed by looking at 5 dimensions. First, we have constructive problem solving. In other words, can you reach a compromise? Are you just going to yell at each other until you both walk away, or is there a way to come up with a compromise? And that's really the foundation for most successful relationships, is being able to compromise. Because if one person gets their way all the time, the other person is going to become resentful and probably actually do things that are going to, in some ways, not necessarily destroy the marriage, but not encourage the marriage to continue. So it's important that each member of the marriage, both the husband and the wife or both partners, actively work together to solve their issues and find a middle ground that they both can live with. Intimacy, being able to share your hopes, dreams, and aspirations, always an important thing. If at the end of the day you've had a lousy day and you want to just go home and tell your husband or wife what happened, that's a good thing. Number 3, equality, and this is a huge issue in households today. Despite the fact that men and women are working at equal paces today, women are still responsible for 83% of the housework, and that was in a recent poll by the Pew Research Studies. And the reality is that if the wife is in charge of all the housework, she becomes cranky and miserable and resentful. So, a good husband understands that he has to step in, whether it's vacuuming or making sure the dishes are done or cooking a few nights a week. Anything that will equalize the relationship is going to be very important. Number 4, autonomy, which is another word for independence. And here's the reality. No matter how much you love your spouse, no matter how many things you have in common, it's still good to have independent time away. So, if the wife wants to go to bingo with her best friend, that's fine. That doesn't mean she doesn't love her husband. It's just that she needs to do something that's more female-centric. In the same way that a man may prefer to go to a basketball or football game with a friend instead of his wife. And especially if the wife is not into sports. So, having time alone, being able to do your own thing is really important. If you drag your spouse to every art museum that you love, they're going to eventually get annoyed because they're not interested. So it's better off just doing your own thing once in a while. Of course, you should avoid, taking a date when you go on your autonomous little visits. And then last is barriers to leaving. And this is an issue in terms of when you're young, when you're 24, 25 years old, you don't own a lot. You may have a car that has a payment plan. You have an apartment. You might have some furniture. But you don't have a lot. Now, go forward 10 years and you probably own a house, you have a car, you may have a retirement or pension plan, you may have stocks and bonds. Well, when you divorce, all of that stuff usually is split in half. And so a lot of people, especially very successful people, will avoid getting a divorce because they don't want to have to cash out all their investments and potentially lose money. Another barrier to leaving is children. Because ultimately, if you are a parent who's very dedicated to your child, you may not want to have shared custody. You may not want to only see your child once or twice a week. You may want to see your child all the time. So there are couples that live in the same house but are ostensibly separated, but they're there for their children because neither parent wants to only be a part-time parent. When dealing with stress, men respond with what we call flight or fight. They either run away or attack. And again, a lot of this comes from the minds that we developed 10,000 years ago. When there is an issue, we either run away or we deal with it. Women, however, tend to respond with what we call bend and bond, meaning they seek compromise and build a better relationship. So, when a man and woman are fighting, the man has this overwhelming urge to just get out, run away, whereas a woman wants to talk about her relationship ad nauseum. And that's where, again, the basic nature of men and women are often contrary, so they don't always agree on how to solve problems. So why do people get divorced? Well, both genders pretty much claim emotional incompatibility. They don't agree on things. They don't have the same desires anymore. For men only, they will claim sexual incompatibility, meaning they want to have sex 3 or 4 times a week and the wife wants to have sex 3 or 4 times a month. And for a man, that can be very frustrating. And, it is something that often comes about because the woman is so exhausted because she's doing 83% of the housework. So, young men who are listening, take that as a hint. And for women, they will often file for divorce when they find out that their husband is cheating on them. And it's not necessarily a reflection on the wife as much as a reflection on the man, but the wife sees it as a judgment that she's not good enough, and she will walk away rather than trying to accept that she was not good enough. So the current U.S. divorce rate is about 50%. And this has gone up significantly since the 1970s because of a few elements. First, divorce laws have been liberalized, meaning, back in 1970, if you wanted to divorce, somebody had to take the blame. The most common divorce element was called emotional cruelty, meaning the husband or wife were cruel to one another. And somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s, a lot of these ideas became were rejected by the courts, saying, you know what, sometimes a husband and wife, no one's being cruel, no one is doing anything they shouldn't be doing, they've just grown apart. So, if you think about it, the person you are at 20 or 22 is not the person you are at 30, and you're certainly not the person you are at 40. We change as we get older. Time shapes us. Water weareth away the rock. Time changes who we are, and sometimes people do just grow apart. Also, in terms of society, it is more acceptable to be divorced than it was 30 or 40 years ago. Divorces are much less expensive if they're handled well. If you hate your spouse and you want to screw them over, it's going to be very expensive. But if you're both willing to walk away, divide your assets and figure out something to do with the kids, it'll be a relatively inexpensive divorce. And finally, broadening opportunities for women has led to financial and social independence for women. Back in the day, a woman didn't have much choice. Her husband was the breadwinner, and she didn't have experience or skills, and as such, she was in a situation or a scenario where literally she would have no way of supporting herself if she left. Now we're going to talk about something called the life cycle studies based on Daniel Levinson's theory. Daniel Levinson recognized a general pattern of adult development. And with his approval, his assistant, Gail Sheehy, wrote Passages was a non-academic version of Levinson's work, and this became one of the big bestsellers in the 1970s. Everybody had it. During early adulthood, Levinson studied men aged 17 to 33, and he calls this the novice stage. According to Levinson's theory, men accomplish 4 major tasks in early adulthood. First, they have the dream, who they want to be, how they envision themselves. Then they develop a mentoring relationship, which is when an older man can offer advice and suggestions. And studies have shown all over the place that men and women significantly benefit from having a strong mentor. Occupational development is number 3, and that assesses the strengths and chooses a vocation that values those strengths. If you're somebody who's very organized and able to do great analysis, that's going to lead you to a career that is analysis based, and you're going to be happier because you're using something you're good at. Finally, number 4 is a love-based relationship. You choose a marriage partner, you decide if you want to have children, and you have a better understanding of the kind of relationship you seek. When a man hits his late 20s, he goes through a period of self-doubt or a period of reinvention, where he questions the decisions he has made about his 4 major tasks. And this is the time where he make serious changes to these 4 components. So if you tend to get married very young, 21 or 22, by 30 there's a very good chance you will be divorced because in fact you are not the same person. By the time the man moves into his early 30s, he has a clearer understanding of his strengths and weaknesses and the goals he wants to achieve in his life. Now what about women? Levinson believed that women have a similar stage in terms of the 4 components, but their reality is complicated by changing societal expectations and roles for women, which causes anxiety about identity. You know, one of the most vibrant memories I have from elementary school is when I was in 1st or 2nd grade, we had to go around the room talking about what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I said, of course, that I wanted to be a fireman. And they said, no, you can't be a fireman because only men are firemen, but I can marry a fireman. And then, of course, I said, well, I want to be a police officer because I thought carrying a gun would be pretty cool. And again, I was told that women are not police officers, but I could marry one. And, you know, at that stage, and this is the early 1970s, there were a lot of opportunities that were just not open to women, whereas today, if a 7-year-old says she wants to be a police officer, there's no problem with that. Half the TV shows on television feature female detectives. Now, while Levinson was working on this, he dies while working on the research for a book about women, and his study ultimately was never completed. So, let's talk about Erikson. The crisis at this stage is intimacy versus isolation. And this is the idea of connecting with someone. So those who achieve intimacy are able to commit themselves to a concrete relationship with others. And they have developed the ethical strength to embrace those commitments, even though they may call for significant sacrifices. You know, it's the old joke of, you know, you finally get engaged and then the perfect woman shows up. Well, the reality is once you make a commitment to somebody, that commitment is something you should truly commit to, unless you realize that you were crazy and you need to move on with your life. Those who isolate themselves choose to distance themselves from others. The lone wolf is the type of person who avoids relationships because they fear they or their choices will be criticized. A lone wolf is someone who has really low self-esteem, and they're afraid that somebody is going to question them or criticize them and make them feel even worse about themselves. Then we have Carol Gilligan. And what her studies have shown are that men need to define their identity before they can achieve intimacy, whereas women begin to understand their identity as they achieve intimacy. And why is this? Because men are taught to be self-sufficient, whereas women are taught to be self-sacrificing and dependent. And again, a lot of this does change over time because the women who are being raised today are having a much different experience than the women who were raised 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Masculinity is defined by separation and femininity is defined by attachment. Just think about the books that are out there for young adults. For men, it's about going on an adventure, dealing with crises, overcoming challenges. And for a lot of times women, it's about their attachment to somebody. You know, even the Hunger Games, where Katniss is going on an adventure. She's doing this to save her sister initially, and then ultimately to save everyone in her district by the time you get to the 3rd book. Whereas with masculinity, you know, and boy books, you know, you have Harry Potter. He doesn't care what eventually happens to Hermione, because for him it's about saving humanity. It's about saving the world of witchcraft for his people. So it's a different kind of book. Then we have Erich Fromm, who believed that true intimacy is achieved through validation. This is reciprocal sharing of deep secrets and feelings that people will allow them to feel loved and accepted. However, the person who validates you can be the person who betrays you, which is why divorce can be so acrimonious. So, when you get married to someone and you love them and they validate you, and then 10 years later you find out they're cheating on you, what they're essentially doing is invalidating you, which is why it hurts so much. Now, going back to the parental part of the young adulthood, we're going to look at Ellen Galinsky's periods of parenting, called the 6 stages of parenthood. And she describes how parents develop through their interaction with children. So the 6 stages are parental image stage, nurturing stage, authority stage, integrative stage, independent teenage stage, and departure stage. So let's look at the parental image stage first. The mother and father form their image of themselves as parents during the planning of the pregnancy and the pregnancy itself. They have a desire to be perfect, and they imagine their child will be perfect also. When you are pregnant, you automatically think your children are going to grow up to be the president, they're going to grow up to cure cancer, they're going to grow up to essentially change the world. And you, as the perfect mother and father, are going to nurture them to achieve all these goals. Well, then the reality hits and the baby's actually born. And this occurs, we have nurturing. And we have, of course, the most important thing is attachment. And the relationships with your spouse, with the baby, with other people are often challenged and determined. Heavy demands are being made upon the parents at this time as they essentially establish their roles. Mom is getting up at 3 a.m. to do the feeding. Dad is getting up at 5 a.m. to do the feeding. There's all of these new expectations and demands. And, those perfect parents that you envisioned while you're pregnant are now so exhausted they don't care that they're walking around with baby spit up on their clothes. Then we go into the authority stage. And this is when a child is between the ages of 2 and 4, and adults face questions of their effectiveness as parents. Kids are really tough at this age because they have so much energy and parents are so tired. The young child is beginning to develop independence and more demands are made on the parent's time. Often a second child is born, adding to the stress of the family. So, mom and dad are extremely stressed out. They're tired. The child has got the highest amount of energy they're ever going to have, which is really a recipe for, oftentimes conflict and issues in the family. Then we go into the integrative stage, and this is from preschool through middle childhood. As children develop more autonomy and social skills, parents are required to set realistic goals, motivate their children, develop effective communication skills, and establish authority. In other words, you go from this nurturing parent into a parent who's just trying to keep up with your toddler, and then when they're actually in school, you become their coach. You have to encourage them, you have to set boundaries, and this becomes a very challenging part also because mostly you just want to snuggle with them on the couch, but you're also required as their parent to keep them motivated to be successful. Then we get to everyone's favorite stage, which is the independent teenage stage. And this is the time when adolescents wrestle with identification, responsibility, and maturity. Parents must provide support for their adolescents while maintaining authority and responsibility, and keeping in mind that the adolescent feels that everything their parents are telling them is to try and lock them in the house. So it's a very challenging stage. This is when detachment is beginning. Children are detaching from their parents, parents are detaching from their children. And this leads to the last stage, which is the departure stage. And this is when the child leaves home. At this time, parents evaluate their past performance and prepare for the future relationship with their offspring. The key point that Galinsky is talking about is that parenthood develops as the child grows, and a parent's self-concepts are shaped through interactions with children at each stage. When parents are aware of and can achieve their goals, they will be happy and satisfied. If not, the parents will be frustrated, stressed, and depressed, which will then transfer to the child also. So we're going to finish this lecture by just briefly touching on John Piaget and his cognitive developmental approach. He calls this is called cognitive structures, and it's the way our brains allow us to organize and adapt to our world. So as a child grows, their cognition becomes more sophisticated, and each stage represents the child's understanding of reality during that period. We begin with the most concrete of concepts, mom, dad, dog, and as we age, we develop the ability to understand more abstract ideas, such as love, hate, happy, sad. So we start with nouns, and then we move on to adjectives. Development from one stage to the next is caused by the accumulation of errors in the child's understanding of their environment. And this accumulation eventually requires reorganizing. This leads us to how we respond to our environment. We assimilate, meaning we modify information and shape it to our thinking. So as an example, a child sees a cow for the first time and says doggy. So they know that a doggy has 4 legs and that it has a tail, and from that very limited understanding, they decide that that animal is a doggy. And so that cow is now also a doggy. The second method is called accommodation, and this is when we change based on information we take in. Accommodation refers to the development of a new concept. So our example is the same scenario, but the parent says, "No, honey, that's not a doggy, that's a cow." So the next time the cow comes along, the child says cow. The dog concept has been modified and a new concept, i.e. cow, has been created. This relates to us as adults also. So for an example, a parent believes that homosexuality is evil. Their child, who they love very much, tells their mom and dad they're gay. The assimilating parent holds on to the existing concept. So now they believe that their child is also evil. The accommodating parent changes their concept so that now they understand that not all homosexuals are evil. The balance between assimilating and accommodating is called equilibration or equilibrium, and that ultimately helps us manage new ideas and fitting new ideas into our old ideas. All right, that finishes this chapter. If you have any questions, please feel free to email or text me, and have a great day.